Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Mrs. Jensen's Audiobooks. Today, we're going to be finishing part one of the Odyssey. We're reading the last episode of his journey back home. And then when we pick up next week, we're going to be moving on to part two, which looks at when Odysseus is back home in Ithaca. So today, we're reading The Cattle of the Sun God, and where we pick up, Odysseus and his crew barely survive the treacherous journey past the Scylla and Charybdis. However, it's not without sacrifice. 6 of Odysseus's bravest men are eaten alive by the Scylla. The ship finally lands on the island of Thrinacia, where the cattle of the sun god Helios live. Odysseus has an ominous feeling as the crew arrives on the island, as he remembers Tiresias' warning: no harm can come to any of the cattle, or the men will suffer dire consequences. While I was still at sea in my black ship and heard the lowing cattle being penned and bleating sheep, there fell into my heart the speeches of Tiresias of Thebes, the sightless prophet, Circe's words as well, back on Aea. So with heavy heart I spoke to my companions. Shipmates, let all of you now swear this solemn oath. If by chance we find a herd of cattle or a large flock of sheep, not one of you will be so overcome with foolishness that you will kill a cow or sheep. Instead, you will be content to eat the food supplies which goddess Circe gave. Once I'd said this, they swore, as I had asked, they'd never kill those animals. When they had made the oath and finished promising, we moved our ship inside a hollow harbor, by a spring whose water tasted sweet. Then my crewmen disembarked and made a welcome dinner. When everyone had eaten food and drunk to ease his heart, they wept as they recalled those dear companions Scylla snatched away out of the hollow ship and then devoured. As they cried there, sweet sleep came over them. But when 3/4 of the night had passed, and the stars had shifted their positions, cloud-gatherer Zeus stirred up a hostile wind and an amazing storm, which hid in clouds both land and sea alike, and then dark night descended. Once rose-fingered dawn arrived, we dragged up our ship and then secured it inside a hollow cave, a place nymphs use as fine dancing and assembly ground. But then south wind kept blowing one whole month. It never stopped. No other wind sprang up, except those times when east and south wind blew. Now, while the men still had red wine and bread, they did not touch the cattle. They were keen to stay alive. But once what we had stored inside our ship was gone, they had to roam, scouring around for game and fish and birds, whatever came to hand. They made bent hooks to fish, as starvation gnawed their stomachs. At that point, I went inland, up island, to pray to the gods, hoping one of them would show me a way home. Once I had moved across the island, far from my companions, I washed my hands in a protected spot, a shelter from the wind, and said my prayers to all the gods who live on Mount Olympus, when they poured sweet sleep across my eyelids. Meanwhile, Eurylochus began to give truly bad advice to my companions. Shipmates, although you're suffering distress, hear me out. For wretched human beings, all forms of death are hateful. But to die from lack of food, to meet one's fate like that is worst of all. So come, let's drive away the best of Helios' herds, and then we'll sacrifice to the immortal gods who hold wide heaven. And if we get home, make it to Ithaca, our native land, for Helios Hyperion will build a splendid temple, and inside we'll put many expensive gifts. If he's enraged about his straight-horned cattle and desires to wreck our ship, and other gods agree, I'd rather lose my life once and for all by choking on a wave than starve to death on an abandoned island. Eurylochus spoke. My other comrades agreed with what he said. They quickly rounded up the finest beasts from Helios' herd, which was close by, sleek, broad-faced animals with curving horns, gazing near the dark, proud ship. My comrades stood around them, all praying to the gods. They broke off tender leaves from a high oak, for there was no white barley on the ship. Once they had prayed, they cut the creatures' throats, flayed them, and cut out portions of the thighs. These they hid in double layers of fat and laid raw meat on top. They had no wine to pour down on the flaming sacrifice, so they used some water for libations and roasted all the entrails in the fire. Once the thigh parts were completely roasted and they'd had a taste of inner organs, they sliced the rest and skewered it on spits. That was the moment sweet sleep left my eyes. I went down by the shore to our swift ship. As I drew closer to our curving ship, the sweet smell of hot fat flooded around me. I groaned and cried out to the immortals, Father Zeus and you other sacred gods who live forever, you forced it on me, that cruel sleep, to bring about my doom. For my companions who remained behind have planned something disastrous. A messenger quickly came to Helios Hyperion, long-robed Lampeter, bringing the news. We had killed his cattle. Without delay, Helios spoke to the immortals, full of rage. Father Zeus and you other blessed gods who live forever, take your vengeance now on these men, companions of Odysseus, Laertes' son, who in their arrogance have killed my animals, the very ones I always look upon with such delight, whether I move up to starry heaven and then turn back from there towards the earth. If they don't pay me proper restitution for these beasts, then I'll go down to Hades and shine among the dead. Cloud-gathered Zeus answered him and said, Helios, I think you should keep on shining for immortals and for mortal beings on fertile earth. With a dazzling thunderbolt, I myself will quickly strike at the swift ship of theirs, and in the middle of the wine-dark sea, smash it to tiny pieces. I learned of this from fair Calypso, who said herself had heard it from Hermes the messenger. I came down to the sea and reached the ship. There I bitterly attacked my crewmen, each of them in turn, standing by the boat. But we could not find a single remedy. The cattle were already dead. The gods immediately sent my men bad omens. Hides crept along the ground, while on the spits the meat began to bellow, and a sound like cattle lowing filled the air. For 6 days, those comrades I had trusted feasted there, eating the cattle they had rounded up, the finest beasts in Helios' herd. But when Zeus, son of Cronos, brought to us the 7th day, the stormy winds died down. We went aboard at once, put up the mast, hoisted the white sail, and left the island, out on the wide sea. Once we'd sailed away, no other land appeared, just sky and sea. The son of Cronos sent us a black cloud above our hollow ship, while underneath the sea grew dark. Our boat sailed on its course, but not for long. All at once, west wind whipped up a frantic storm. The blast of wind snapped off both forestays on the mast, which then fell back, all of our rigging crashing down in the hold. In the stern part of the ship, the failing mast struck the helmsman on his head, caving in his skull every bone at once. Then he fell like a diver off the boat. His proud spirit left his bones. Then Zeus roared out his thunder, and with a bolt of lightning struck our ship. The blow from Zeus's lightning made our craft shiver from stem to stern, and filled it up with sulfur smoke. My men fell overboard and rode atop the waves like seabirds around our blackened ship, because the god had robbed them of their chance to get back home. But I kept moving up and down the deck until the breaking seas had loosened off both sides of the keel. Waves were holding up the shattered ship, but then snapped off the mast right at the keel. But the oxhide backstay had fallen over it. So with that, I lashed them both together, mast and keel. I sat on these and then was carried off by those destructive winds. But when the storms from the west wind ceased, south wind began to blow, and that distressed my spirit. I worried about floating back to grim Charybdis. All night I drifted. When the sun came up, I reached Scylla's cliff and dread Charybdis, still sucking down salt water from the sea. I jumped up into the lofty fig tree and held on there as if I were a bat. But there was nowhere I could plant my feet, nor could I climb the tree. Its roots were spread far down below me, and its branches stretched above me, out of reach, immense and long, shadowing Charybdis. So I hung there, staunch in the hope that when she spewed again, she'd throw up keel and mast. And to my joy, at last they surfaced. My hands and feet let go, and from up high I fell into the sea beside those lengthy spars. I sat on them and used my hands to paddle my way through. I drifted for 9 days. On the 10th night, I was guided to Ogygia by the gods, the island where fair-haired Calypso lives, fearful goddess with the power of song. She welcomed me and treated me with care. But why should I tell you that story now? It was only yesterday, in your home, I told it to you and your noble wife. And it's an irritating thing, I think, to retell a story once it's clearly told.